Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. And I was considering, as I was waiting to present, the wealth of global netball knowledge in this room. So it's a great privilege to be able to share this with you. And I'm as interested in your comments and contributions, as the experts, as to feedback as to how this looks to you as well. I'm here today to talk about the knee program, and I was keen to really explore a couple of main points, and one is an understanding of why it is that we've developed this resource, and also to share some of the challenges that we've had since its implementation. The process began over 5 years ago, because it isn't, I think the development of the resource is certainly a key part, but actually getting it going in your own individual community is where you will find a lot of the challenges. So I'd like to try and share some of the learnings that we've had to see if that can help in your process as well. This is just a video which outlines the key elements. So we're keen to demonstrate some of the exercises, and this will outline some of the exercises that appear in the program itself.
Quick changes of direction, jumping, landing and rapid deceleration are all key components of this spectacle, which can sometimes unfortunately lead to serious injuries for players. Australian Netball Diamonds head physiotherapist Alanna Antcliff has designed the knee injury prevention program for netballers. The program enhances performance and extends play to help counter the amount of lower limb injuries in the sport. This is a world first for netball and aims to keep players on court for longer and moving more efficiently. Used by the Australian Netball Diamonds as their warm-up routine, this breakthrough resource has been designed for players aged 10 and above to be delivered as their warm-up for training and games. Its goal is simple: to ensure players across Australia develop excellent movement technique and reduce injuries while achieving this. Welcome to Netball Australia's Knee Program, a groundbreaking coaching resource to support the future wellbeing of all netballers across Australia.
Certainly in Australia, similar to New Zealand, the netball is the #1 team sport for women and girls, and we have over 1.2 million participants that are enjoying the game nationally. And obviously with participation comes injury risk. And the key point with that graph is that the spikes there relate to knees and ankles. So as you would expect, that 75% of injuries in Australia are attributed to the knee and the ankle. So that's why we've directed our attention towards these main areas. And another interesting fact is that most of the injuries occur on landing. So just under 50% of injuries occur on landing, hence why landing is one of the main components of all these injury prevention programs. And it's great to see that Shani's made the highlights reel. Shans, you'll be happy with this one. Identifying a high-risk landing. But this just wanted to show with you what we look for on the court. So you can see there you've got a knee that's not bending. You've got trunk sway, which is just from the contest of the ball, and that trunk sway relatively puts you off balance and puts your knee in an at-risk position. That leg that's swinging out to the side, again, is putting an incremental load on your knee, the stance knee. And the foot not being lined up, so rotation of the foot outwards, are all things that we try to prevent when we're looking at landing technique. And then when we look particularly at ACL injuries, so anterior cruciate ligament injuries, which was spoken about by Sharon and Kate, but certainly that's the main killer for us. Whereas ankle injuries may be slightly more prevalent, knee injuries are far more costly in terms of time away from the sport. It's the primary focus in terms of us preventing them, as it essentially equates to about a year away from sport, at best 9 months away from sport. And in 2016 for us, that equated on an absolute value of 415 years of rehab for Australian netballers and a cost of $5 million. So it is very worthwhile preventing these injuries. And certainly, in addition to just the cost and the time away from the sport, there's also a social cost. Before we talked about the well-being of athletes, and I know Shans will elaborate on this. But you know, your netball is your social hub. It's if you're injured for that length of time, you remove that whole part of your life, which is often what is driving the young athletes. Females are 4 to 6 times more likely, just by the fact that we're female, for a whole range of reasons in terms of sustaining ACL injuries, and particularly athletes in that 15 to 18 age category. Females 15 to 18 years are the highest risk group for ACL injuries. So it's critical that we're doing what we can to try and prevent it, particularly in this age group. And I would say that they're the plum age. They're the ones that probably don't have as much control, don't have the strength conditioning behind them, and it's where you can make the most impact. Return to sport rates after ACL injuries vary. Only about 40% return to pre-injury level, so there's a high drop-off rate. 30% never return to sport after ACL injury. And probably the most worrying thing is the signs of degenerative change when you have an anterior cruciate ligament injury. Pretty much, particularly if your cartilage is involved, you will have osteoarthritis within 20 years of that injury. So very worthwhile preventing. Again, the mechanisms: landing, change of direction and deceleration. And that's particularly important if your technique is poor with them. And obviously netball requires all of those things multiple times per game and training. Particularly with netball, just drilling down exactly on how they happen. So the main thing is a landing after a contested landing. So if you land and you think you're going to land in a particular position, but you have an opponent that destabilises you, and suddenly your trunk is over here and relatively your knee is turning in. So that is why in the warm-up that we do a lot of work where we're doing landing, but we get kind of shifting and shunting of the hips and the pelvis with pushing. We're not trying to practice contacting, we're actually trying to get the players to have the robustness to withstand contact and to land safely. Secondly, the main thing is in transition. So a player will drive towards the ball and they will turn to face down court to offload the ball, and that trunk rotation, then when you land, your knee will be rotating inwards, and again, that's a high risk position. So that's why we put rotation into the landings, so that you're kind of learning to withstand that rotational force. And lastly, it would be change of direction with a really wide stance. Again, if you see Gretel's knee there's a high force, particularly with an opponent, but a high force actually shifting the knee into that bent position. So we've developed this resource online, so you could access it now if you wanted to, if the Wi-Fi was strong enough. It's freely accessible. Suggest you do it. Pop on your phone, knee.netball.com.au, and everything is freely accessible on that. So you have a full outline of all the exercises, showing exactly how you instruct the exercise. It's shown that giving certain cues to athletes helps them learn how to do an exercise more effectively. So for example, if you tell a player to bend your knees, it's actually not as effective as saying land quietly, land softly. And it's a subtle difference between an external cue, which is focusing on the result of landing quietly, as opposed to an inwardly biomechanical cue that they need to think about. So there's some subtle differences in the resource which gives what you're looking for, but actually how you cue the athlete to get that effect. In addition to a complete outline of all the exercises, there's a one-page kind of cheat sheet that you can take to training and just has the list of exercises, because it's very hard to remember everything when you're standing in front of a group of athletes. There are video links to every exercise so you can ensure that you know how to do it and to do it correctly, and a few other resources to download as well. I appreciate that we have the benefit of Wi-Fi when we are at training, and that may not be the case for everybody, but what I would suggest is that you download the resources onto your phone and you have them on your phone, and then you are able to access them wherever you are. And so this is basically the program. There are 3 levels of the program: one designed for junior athletes, which is about 10 to 14, one designed for recreational level, so that's anyone in the community of any age or of any age, and then the elite level program. And basically it's the same principles, but it's increasing the degree of difficulty. So there would be no problem with moving between some of the programs dependent on the ability of your athletes. And much the same as the Netball Smart program, it's going to focus on the key reasons as to why netballers injure themselves. So takeoff and landing, deceleration and change of direction. And we've designed it as a warm-up program, and the reason for that is that if you add on, evidence will show that if you add on extras, they just don't get done. If you have a very constrained time where you have with your athletes as a coach, you don't want to be adding on extra things in addition to everything else you need to achieve. But everyone needs to warm up in some way. So the idea is that this replaces the general warm-up that you may have originally applied with evidence-informed exercises that will help prevent injury. And the key as well is that it doesn't just prevent injury, as Kate mentioned, it also enhances performance, and there is evidence, overwhelming evidence behind it. These programs reduce injury by as much as 80%, 50 to 80%. This is in other sports, essentially in football and European handball, which is quite similar to netball. But it also improves vertical jump, agility and speed off the mark. So your athletes will be moving better when they're using these types of programs. What we look for, as we saw in the video, we're looking for alignment of your knee position. So you want your knees stacked over your feet, you need your feet facing forwards, you need to have absorption of the landing through your hips and your knees, so basically bending your hips and your knees. We don't want that inward rotation as highlighted by the cross. You don't want a stiff landing. With deceleration, you want to take multiple short steps to decelerate. Now, I appreciate this is off-ball. You obviously can't do that when you have the ball in hand, but this is for your off-court movement down the court when you're making drives, to not have one large, hard step, but rather multiple short steps with your knee in slight degree of bend, as opposed to that knee extension. And change of direction, similarly, you don't want a wide stance with your change of direction. You want to actually plant through your your both feet. You're using the outside foot essentially as the brake, but you're using your inside foot as the accelerator. So you don't want to kind of do both on one leg, because that will overload that one leg. So certainly planting your feet, but you're driving off your inside leg to make that next movement. And all of that's highlighted on this resource. And once those principles are developed within your players, you then pop it into the warm-up program itself. It is highlighted in great detail, but I think the take-home message is to not be overwhelmed by the detail, but just to understand that the key principles are landing, change of direction, and deceleration. And any flavour that you put on that, you don't have to follow it like a manuscript, but it is there for you if that's of use. And I guess what I wanted to talk a bit more about is actually the implementation of these programs. So one of the key things is that, yes, you can, as a coach, you can stand and you can go, yep, we're going to do this program, it's going to really help. But you need to make sure that you're giving the athletes feedback so that you're correcting their incorrect motor patterns rather than just reinforcing a poor technique. And that's where your phone can actually become quite useful. If you can take a small video image of your athlete and show them what they are doing, because often they are visual learners, and you show them where they need to be, and put a bit of responsibility back onto the athletes in terms of learning what's wrong and working on how to actually correct it. And in addition to that, I think you need to just gradually introduce the program. So don't try and get them to do everything at once. It won't work. You need to just focus on a few key concepts to get that going well. It is important to be able to demonstrate the technique as opposed to just explaining it to them. The program must be continued in order to be effective. So if you do this for a couple of weeks and go, great, we've got the netball program going, if you stop it, the effect immediately diminishes or is lost. So in order for effectiveness, it needs to be done for about 10 to 12 weeks before you actually start to get it. And that's similar to what Sharon was saying. It takes a while for the athletes to get confident with it, but persist with it, because the results then, it does become second nature. In terms of the frequency, ideally you want them doing it twice a week, and whereas you may not be training twice a week, but if the players have a list of things that they can do, some players will do it, some players won't, but at least you are giving them the information and providing them the opportunity to take responsibility for it themselves. I think it's important that the athletes know why it is that you're getting them to do the exercises. I think that does help with compliance as well. And almost to drive a bit of a movement within the teams themselves. So whether it's the captain or whether it's someone else in the team, but to give them the responsibility of being the warm-up captain or to be able to encourage the athletes to do that. And I think the final point is to talk to the key decision makers, which I assume is many of you. So to get those that are influential within the netball world to be on board with these kind of programs, because as an individual within a club, it's very hard to actually get a program going. I think that's it. I think so. From our point of view, it's been multiple years in the making. We have learnt to not complicate things, so to keep it simple, to try and take some responsibility on the athletes, most definitely, but also to the number one barrier to success of such programs is the coach. So it's critical that we get the coach going. And in Australia, what we have done is that we've now made that part of the coach accreditation process. So annually, the coaches need to take a short quiz to test their proficiency of the knee program and knowledge of that. And I've also, in Australia, have developed a resource for the support person associated with the team. So in our case, it's essentially physiotherapists, but again have developed an online resource for the physios to actually ensure that they're proficient in the technique. But whoever it is that is surrounding the players, you want to make sure that they have access to the information, but a clear plan on how they're actually going to implement it within the team. Thank you.